do parents need to know about testing and assessments? I'm Shauna Fritzler, and I work as a Regional Advocacy Specialist for National PTA as part of the College and Career Readiness team, which includes Crystal Jones and Melissa Yeoman. Thank you for joining us as we present on this important topic. All attendees are in mute mode. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them in the chat box, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Before we start the presentation, I'd like to share a little background on PTA. National PTA is the oldest and largest child advocacy association in America. Today's PTA is comprised of approximately 4 million parents, teachers, grandparents, caregivers, foster parents, business and community leaders, and other caring adults who share a commitment to improving the education, health, and safety of all children. PTA's mission is to make every child's potential a reality by engaging and empowering families and communities to advocate for all children. As part of our efforts to ensure the educational success of children and promotion of parental involvement in schools, PTA leaders from across the country are working to educate parents and communities about topics related to college and career readiness, such as standards, assessments, implementation, and accountability. As a child advocacy association, National PTA is always willing to provide our members the resources needed to make sure that the parent voice is part of the conversation when it comes to our students. For years, most year-end tests were mainly multiple choice exams that focused on basic skills. These tests did a poor job of measuring the skills students need for success after high school, like writing, critical thinking, and problem solving. With new education standards, states have worked together to develop higher quality tests. Schools have replaced their old tests with new assessments built to let parents and teachers know how well students are learning the skills and knowledge they need to succeed in today's world. What are the new tests trying to accomplish? They are measuring real-world skills, ending teaching to the test, identifying whether students are on the path to success, using technology to provide better information for teachers and parents, providing opportunities for early intervention, and to support students with special needs. This information and more can be found on PTA's resource, Moving Beyond the Bubble. We'll share more about resources at the end of the webinar. Now, I would like to introduce the amazing Shelley Anderson, President of Arkansas PTA.
Thank you, Shauna. On behalf of Arkansas PTA and the CCRI team, we thank you for taking time to join us in our webinar. I am proud to introduce our presenters, Melissa Hayden and Judy Harris from the National Task Force of Assessment Education.
Hi, everyone. This is Judy Harris. I am a National Board Certified teacher, middle school language arts teacher of nearly 18 years, and I'm now the Policy and Advocacy Director at NWEA, where I lead the National Task Force on Assessment Education. NWEA convened the task force in 2015 to confront the very real challenge around assessment literacy and helping all stakeholders understand student assessment and how to better fulfill their role as stakeholders in the education ecosystem. My colleague and friend Melissa Hayden and I are here to joining you today to help parents better understand their role and have some strategies in their back pocket about understanding student assessment and what kinds of questions you can ask of the educators that are with your students in the classroom, and things that you can do at home to support your student as they march kind of towards their own version of whatever the American dream might be for them. So this is all about parents and students today. And as we get started, I want to kind of talk a little bit about, what exactly is assessment literacy. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. And when I hand it over to my colleague, Melissa, she works down in sunny Southern California, and I'll let her tell you a little bit about herself. But with that, let's go ahead and get started because we do have a lot of material to cover today. So what exactly is assessment literacy? Well, We've got a couple of definitions out there, but the National Task Force on Assessment Education wrote this one, which has been widely accepted. From the National Task Force on Assessment Education, assessment is the process of gathering evidence of student learning to inform education-related decisions. The impact of decisions turns on the quality of the evidence gathered, which in turn depends on the quality of the assessment and associated practices used to gather it. Those who are assessment literate understand how to gather dependable evidence and how to use it productively to support or certify achievement. I think this is really important to understand because under No Child Left Behind, there were a lot of assessments happening at our students, and this is the point where I like to say we need to turn this around. Education needs to be something that's done with and for and by students rather than something that's at them or to them. And this second bullet point here really speaks to that a little bit. You know, garbage in, garbage out is an old saying that they use in IT, and if you're going to be making decisions based on the data you gather, then let's make sure that that data is sound, and there are 5 keys that we talk about with that you're going to hear about today. But again, if you're going to be making education-related decisions that impact students, then we've got to make sure that the evidence gathered and the way it was gathered is absolutely the very best it can be. National PTA also has a position statement about this, and I'd like to share that with you as well. Federal, state, and local policymakers and all education stakeholders, including parents and families, must be stewards of effective assessment systems. All students should participate in high-quality and comprehensive assessment systems that measure their growth and achievement so all children have the opportunity to reach their full potential. And I want to really underpin that last piece of that. All children, not some children, not just a few children, but that all children have the opportunity to reach their full potential. Because accurate and reliable student assessment systems at whatever level, we need to be gathering good data in order to be making good decisions for those students so that indeed they do have opportunities and open doors in front of them. So I know that's kind of a lot to take in, and that's, you know, that kind of sounds like education and mumbo jumbo and stuff like that. So let's really get to what we need to know as parents. So assessment literate parents and interested community members understand that our students, their children, are entitled to clear targets, quality assessments, effective communication of results, and equity of motivation, and they act assertively to protect those rights. In a broader sense, parents are advocates for sound assessment practices for the sake of their own children and for nurturing effective schools in their communities. So let's back up to that first bullet point there and just take a brief moment on that one. All children are entitled to clear targets, quality assessments, effective communication of results, and equity of motivation, and they act assertively to protect those rights. Here in the state of Oregon, back in 2015, we moved legislation to absolutely protect those rights of the students, and the form that it took was a Students' Assessment Bill of Rights, written by Rick Stiggins, who by many in the assessment world is considered kind of the godfather of student assessment. But Rick wrote those rights because he knew that students are also stakeholders in their education. It's not just about policymakers or building administrators or teachers or the parents. It's about the student. And this, again, we come back to that education must be something that's done with and for students, not at or to students. So again, as parents, you need to be advocating for sound assessment practices, and Melissa and I are going to share information so that you know you're doing that with some real knowledge. Excuse me. There are 5 keys to a solid assessment system, and we're going to cover each one of those 5. Key number 1 is clear purpose. Key number 2, clear learning targets. Key number 3, sound assessment design. Key number 4, effective communication. And key number 5, student involvement. When all 5 of those keys are present, you have a sound, solid quality assessment system. So let's talk about key number 1, clear purpose. Why the heck are we doing this anyway? And you know, I say that and I kind of get a smile because over 17 plus years of teaching, I can't even count how many times students turned around to look at me and said, why are we doing this anyway? And as an educator or as anyone who's involved in this, I need to be able to answer that question. Why are we assessing? And secondly, who's going to use that information? There are a variety of stakeholders out there, and they all have rights to data on our students when they're making education-related decisions. Teachers need to have those discrete daily decisions, sometimes minute to minute within the classroom. They need to have data that supports making accurate diagnostic decisions around the instructional practices for those students. Building administrators and district administrators also need to have data to make decisions around what kind of curriculum program might they purchase, scheduling decisions, class offering kind of decisions. At the state level, the State Department of Ed has a right to data that says how are the schools in our state doing? And then policymakers who make massive funding decisions most definitely have a need and a right towards data as well. They need to be able to look and say, how's our state doing? How's Arkansas doing compared to Oregon? How's Arkansas doing compared to Montana? You know, and how do we fund those programs that we know are really working for kids? So all of those stakeholders have a right to data. It just needs to be the right data to help them make good, sound decisions. And then finally, you know, after you've gone through why are we assessing, who's going to use the information, how are they going to use that, and, you know, i.e. what decisions are they going to make, then therefore what information will they need, because that's different for each of the stakeholder groups. So that's key number one, clear purpose. Why the heck are we assessing in the first place? Key number two, clear learning targets. Are our targets clear to us? Well, I hope so. I mean, I'm the teacher in the classroom. I certainly hope the learning targets are clear to me because I designed my whole lesson plan that day around a learning target. But more importantly, again, we're partnering with those students. So are the learning targets clear to students? And are they not only clear, but almost as importantly, are they visible to the student in the classroom so that the student can see what activity they're doing that day and look up to the learning target and understand that there is a direct link from what they're doing in the classroom that day to the learning target that the teacher has posted for the class that day. And then can we identify what kind of targets we actually have? What are they? What do they look like? What are they centered around? And then do our assignments and assessments reflect the targets students have had the opportunity to learn? That's a big thing because many of the assessments, sometimes the great big state summative assessments, cover a breadth of material, and there might be unfortunately, some things that students haven't had the opportunity to see yet in front of them or had the time to do a deep dive into the learning around that. So having clear learning targets and then the assignments and the assessments around those learning targets have students actually had time and opportunity to learn the material that they need for that learning target. So key number two, again, is clear learning targets. Key number three, sound assessment design. Well, this is an important one. I might know what kind of information I need to get from my students in order to decide how we're going to advance on maybe a vocabulary program or something like that. But if I don't know how to design an assessment that's going to measure that accurately, then I need some work. I need to have some learning on my part. And this is the time where I really want to take a moment, and I know that Melissa might be touching on this in her section as well. Sound assessment design is an interesting thing because assessments run the whole range from a simple, I'm looking at my class and I say, okay, thumbs up in the middle or thumbs down, how are you feeling about this concept that we just talked about? It can go all the way from that all the way up to the very complex state summative assessment that all of our states have and that they're rolling out pretty much as we speak right now because it is testing season. That sound assessment design is super important because that sound assessment design takes all of this into consideration. So we have to select a proper assessment method given the learning targets, and that might be an open response, a selected response, might be a performance task, might be a personal communication, might be that thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the middle kind of a thing. And then you have to frame an appropriate sample. Did I get enough information from enough students to form what we call a statistically reliable number to make any kind of a decision or not? Now, within the classroom, sometimes I'm just looking straight at a kiddo and I just want to see what that one particular student knows or is a little bit shaky on. And in my classroom, every single individual kid is a statistically reliable number. I need to know where every single one of my kids is at. And then we're going to build quality items, tasks, and scoring schemes into that assessment. We're going to anticipate and control relevant sources of bias that can distort results. And I want to kind of talk about this a little bit. This is really important. Not all students come into the building every day with a lot of background knowledge and a lot of resources and a lot of ability and access to books and those kinds of things. They come from different cultures. They come from different neighborhoods. They come from different kinds of families. And so when we're doing an assessment design, we have to make sure that those items don't disadvantage kids coming from different groups, one group over another. We need to make sure that the test items that we're putting out there are equally accessible by all students, thus serving equity. So for example, there's a kind of a famous assessment circles story where way back when there was a big urban school district and they were designing their writing prompt, and they had a big bias committee, which is what most places have, you know, that questions and test items get run through a bias committee. The bias committee missed the boat on this one. They were asking in a great big huge urban school district where there were a lot of kids coming from disadvantaged families and stuff like that, not a lot of wealth, and the writing prompt concerned camping. And needless to say, that spring thousands of students absolutely bombed on the writing test because they had no reference points. They had never been camping. Some of those kids hadn't actually seen much of a park. They certainly didn't understand campfires or fire rings or all of these different kinds of terms and vocabulary that were used in this writing prompt. And so they were disadvantaged, and that's an example of bias. Bias can be based on a number of things. The point is that we want to make sure that we have tasks and items that are equally accessible for all of our students, and that they can answer them with a familiarity and a comfort level so that they can really show us what they know. If they can't approach it, then they can't really show us what they know, then the data that we're getting is not good data to make instructional decisions on. And then finally, under key number 3, sound assessment design, we have to ensure that the assessment yields information that students and teachers can use to improve teaching and learning. We have to ensure that the assessment yields actionable data. Making decisions about how I'm going to regroup my students in their reading groups tomorrow, making a decision about who needs to kind of hold in place in some math right now and continue practicing because they're not ready to move on. Those are actionable decisions. Allowing a superintendent to work with his principals around what kind of curriculum they're going to choose based on what their students need. Those are actionable decisions based on good data and on up the pipeline. So that's all really important to remember. Now, key number 4, effective communication, is one that I don't think we say enough about this. NWEA just did an assessment perception study in the state of Texas in partnership with the Gallup organization, the big organization that does lots of national polling. And what it showed us is that parents reported 60% of parents in Texas who were polled reported that their teachers in their child's classrooms were not communicating with them either at all or enough around assessment results and things like that. And so I want to just pause just a moment here and really talk about this effective communication and share something about that. So informative assessments, those things that are done in a classroom, assessment results function as descriptive feedback to students and teachers. Students are engaged in tracking and communicating about their evolving learning. That's formative. That's done at the classroom level. Summative purpose is achievement tracked by the learning target, and grades communicate achievement, grades and scores. In order for either purpose to succeed, the communication of results must occur in a timely manner in order to inform education decisions. So I want to give you a fun little example. I like this example because it involves a 3rd grader who has really wormed his way into my heart. His name is Irvin, and he's in a classroom of a colleague of mine. Irvin came into the classroom this year as a 3rd grader. reading only at first grade level. Now, there's a big push across this nation, reading by third grade kind of a thing, and Irvin was in big trouble, not trouble, you know, like disciplinary trouble, but he's a struggling reader, right? And now he's in third grade, and it's a big moment for third graders. And so my colleague friend says, I got to get him going. And Irvin, when he first came in, was absolutely unmotivated about reading because he'd spent the past 2 years struggling and knew he didn't have to look more than the kids sitting next to him to know that he, in his mind, was not good enough. He was not good enough. So he has spent the past 2 years feeling pretty beat up and pretty discouraged. And Rick Stiggins talks about this. He talks about it's a teacher's responsibility to build a winning mindset for their students, get those kids feeling successful, not just with a participation ribbon. Mind you, the rigor and the standards and the expectations stay very high, but support those kids so that they get in a winning mindset, because as any good coach will tell you, winning begets winning. And so Kat knows this, and she began to work with Irvin, and she began to work with him on his reading and partner with him. And one of the first conversations she's had with him was, what do you want to be when you grow up? And Irvin has made a sound commitment to wanting to be a veterinarian when he grows up. And the teacher said, well, I think that's a great idea, and I think you'd make a great vet. Sounds like you've picked a job where you're going to have to do a lot of reading. And he says, yes. And she says, well, then we better get to work to make sure that you're a good reader for that job. And they did. And she has communicated with him. She has been right by his side as a partner in his learning, and he completely understands that. And she gives him feedback almost instantaneously about his reading and the progress he's making. And I'm happy to say that she's going to be blogging for us an update on Irvin, because Irvin is now going to close out his third grade year having gained quite possibly over 2 grade levels in his reading, and now in his journal keeps a list of those books that he wants to read going forward. And that's because of effective communication, and he's also got a teacher who is assessment literate and understands what she can do with that data that she brings in from assessing Irvin. But it's timely and effective communication. If Irvin was struggling on a reading test or a reading fluency test or an assessment or something like that he had just taken, and Kat didn't get back to him for another 2 weeks, that's 2 weeks lost. We have to be Johnny on the spot with communicating with our students and the other stakeholders about assessment results. So then key number 5 is one that I know for Melissa and I, this is near and dear to our heart here, student involvement. This really, again, you're going to hear me say it numerous times, education has to be something done with and for students, not at them, and student involvement is key to that. So, and this one relates back to all of the other keys. So with regards to key number 1, are students' information needs planned for and met as they are learning? Is that feedback loop constantly in play with those students? In regards to key number 2, do students have a clear vision of the intended learning targets from the very start? Introduce the learning target. And these are some areas that we'll be talking with you further on in this presentation about those learning targets and questions you can ask around that. Key number 3, are students able to self-assess and set goals on the basis of their assessment results? Well, Irvin sure is now. I'm telling you, that kid knows exactly where he's at. He tracks his own scores and the different things that he's doing in class, because he knows when he gets to a certain point, there's another book on his journal list that he's going to get to check out from the library and read. Do students receive and offer effective feedback during the learning? They need to be offering feedback on their learning as well. They need to be able to say, stop, I've taken in enough information right now, I need to kind of cogitate on this, or they need to be able to honestly and in a very trusting environment say, I don't understand what we just talked about at all, and I need some help here. And then finally, do students track, reflect on, and share their learning progress? Well, I'm here to tell you that Irvin does. And in fact, Irvin took the lead in his own parent-teacher conference and told his parents all about his learning. And so that was really awesome. Now with that, I kind of want to close it out, my part of this, and I'm going to hand it over to Melissa, my colleague from sunny Southern California, and let her introduce herself and then move on to some more targeted strategies that parents can put in play for their kids.
All right, thank you. So just to introduce myself a little bit, my name is Melissa Spaden, and I am an assessment and accountability coordinator with the County Office of San Diego. And I have worked at the classroom level as a high school English and theater teacher and speech coach, and I've also worked at the state level as a state assessment coordinator and worked with NAEP. So my real passion is assessment literacy because I want everyone, students, teachers, people that work for the districts, for the counties, for the states, as well as parents, to really have a firm grasp of what proper assessment is and what we can do with that information. So my goal is to help you figure out what you can do to best support your students. So we have a few things here like asking questions, visiting the school, talking with your student about the assessments they take and how they feel about them, staying in close contact with your student's teacher, and really attending those parent-teacher conferences and using them as a chance for you to engage in a conversation that's a little deeper. So next we're going to talk a little bit about some questions that you can possibly ask. So this is a bit of an overwhelming slide, but you'll get this later as well. You know, a lot of the questions that we come up with are kind of surface level, like how's my child doing? And as a teacher, you don't really know how to answer that. But these are really targeted specific questions that you can ask that will show the teacher what you're specifically interested in. So when you ask something like, what will my child be learning this year? The teacher can go a little bit deeper into what the specific content is, you know, what they'll be working on, what they'll be reading, maybe some projects that they might be completing. And then asking things like, how will I know if my child has learned it and how well? So, you know, that helps to speak to the piece of how can I help monitor from home? Another great question about how they measure your child's learning in the classroom. So that speaks to what kind of assignments, tasks, projects, quizzes, tests, things like that. What are all the different ways that they decide whether your child has learned what has been taught? And when will that progress be measured, or when will some of those updates occur? Because we know that that interim or that report card, that's kind of an after-the-fact indicator right there, right? You get that grade and you know that that's how your child did, but you really want to know how they're doing along the way so that you can support that and help them improve if they need that. And so instead of focusing on grades, we focus on the grade level expectations. So how's my child doing in comparison to grade level expectations? If you know that they're working above grade level, what supports will the teacher provide to ensure that they're extending their learning and they're going beyond? And if they're not quite at grade level, what can you do at home, and what will the teacher be doing to ensure that they progress towards those standards? That's really their goal, your goal as well. And then questions like, what types of strategies are used in the classroom that you can reinforce at home? Maybe there's specific technology tools or processes that they do at school that you could mirror at home. And how can you help your child achieve those learning targets? Maybe it's just asking and answering questions. Maybe it's being the person on the other side of the flashcards, whether they're paper or now a lot of places have them digitally. You know, doing things like that. So how can you support your child's learning and not have a focus on what grade they achieved, because by then it's too late in that process. And so that's kind of the same, this first bullet point, it's kind of the same thing that I was saying. So grades don't tell us a lot about the learning in process. They tell you about the learning that's occurred. So really moving from talking about grades, comparisons with other students, because those don't really help us know what the student knowing can do, and thinking about that growth mindset, encouraging them to practice, to try something again if they make an error, that mistakes and errors are something to learn from, and that they shouldn't be the end of all progress. Modeling some of that descriptive feedback at home. Descriptive feedback is the only way we can improve in anything we do, not just school. So finding ways to engage in that conversation at home. Maybe you guys are cooking together and you work on giving each other feedback on the way the food is tasting in process, or talking about a chore or something around the house, or even if you're watching TV, how would you give feedback to the actor or something like that. But just really finding fun ways of getting them engaged in feedback so that they become better at giving and receiving it, because receiving feedback is one of those things that sometimes can be really difficult. And understanding that the feedback is to help them get better and it's not a judgment. Asking specific questions about success criteria, learning goals, learning progressions, and really how they know that they're doing well and what those goals are. And even talking about setting specific goals for activities outside of school. So if they participate in arts programs or sports or clubs or anything else, encouraging them to set a goal, monitor their progress towards that goal, and then set a new one if they've achieved it. So this is a fun topic always with teenagers, especially talking about work and assessment at home. Instead of saying how'd you do today or what did you learn today? That's always my favorite. What did you learn today? Nothing. That's always a teenager response. So we all know that's true. It's the same thing with in the classroom. They'll tell you nothing even though you went through a really detailed discussion and then they learned. They just don't feel like repeating it. So asking them to explain a piece of work that they brought home, an assignment that they had, tell you about it. And, when they get older and they're working on content that you might not be as familiar with, just listening and asking questions. All right, tell me more about that. Just showing them that you're curious, that you're invested in learning about what they're learning and doing. And finding out what they feel good about, in what areas they're struggling, and what they plan to do specifically about those areas that they struggle. So what are their goals and how are they going to overcome those areas that are more difficult for them? Letting them lead things like parent-teacher and IEP conferences. There's nothing worse than being involved in a parent-teacher conference with a student who's just sitting there passively slouched down being talked about. By having the child take over the parent-teacher conference and talking about themselves, first of all, it gets them involved and forces them to be a part of the conversation. But it makes them a little more, sit up a little straighter, be more invested in their own progress, because they're sort of sharing. They're taking pride in what they're doing, and they're more able to, when they're more able to articulate where they are in their learning, they're more likely to improve. So there are a lot of templates, there's a lot of discussion guides and tools out there for you to use based on the age of the students. But even just having that practice before you go in and having them really ask for the assistance that they might need. And then reviewing any summative work or summative assessment. So if you do get a score report back from a larger assessment, a state or a district level assessment, asking them to go through and share their thinking. So let's talk about what you were thinking when you did this part. How would you fix this? How would you do this differently? Or looking at any task that they do on a regular basis and saying, if you were going to go back and fix that, what would you do this time? Or why do you think you struggled with this part? But really engaging them in identifying what those areas are that they need to grow in, and how they will improve themselves. So here we have some links to learn from. This is just a few. There's a painful amount of information out there about assessment.
That's so true, so very true.
I think that's the best word. There is so much information out there, and I know the PTA has a lot of great resources and information about being a learning hero, and there's some great information there. These two videos are fantastic. I love the first one, Comprehensive Assessment. It's done by an assessment expert who really speaks about the importance of students at the center of assessment, Linda Darling-Hammond. She's a Californian too. But it's an 8-minute long video, and it talks about all the different types of assessment and the importance of really, like those keys that Judy talked about, really ensuring that it's the right type of assessment for the purpose. And then our website with the Assessment Education Task Force, assessmentliteracy.org. And there's a few great articles here that are a little shorter My favorite here is this book if you're working with parents a lot, or you are a naturally curious parent who wants to know all there is to know about school assessment. This is a great book because it's written in terminology that you need, that a parent would need, that different from what an educator would need to know. An educator may be involved more in the design and building it and those processes. Well, as a parent, you're probably not going to be involved in that process. So that's a little less important for you. But it also has some great information about how to talk about assessment and how a lot of the assessment policy and history was created. And it's just a great short book for you as well. And I think I feel like I'm about to be Forrest Gump. That's all I have to say about that. Although I could say a lot more about assessment, but for everyone's sake, I won't.
It is so true. And, I just want to add, before I hand it back to the other Melissa here today, is that please do share out the assessmentliteracy.org as a resource. There are a number of resources on there that are absolutely geared for parents. We've got a number of blogs that have been written specifically to help parents understand and be more effective advocates for their students with regards to student assessment. And so that in conjunction with the other resources that Melissa has put there can really go a long ways towards helping parents feel more comfortable having these conversations with their students' teachers. And I would urge parents not to wait for just the, twice a year parent-teacher conferences, which is what we have here in Oregon. Be kind of while I would never want to urge a parent to be in the building all the time, every day, that kind of thing, unless they're, helping with some of the volunteer work. But I would most definitely urge you to be proactive in supporting your student and asking these questions of the teachers so that you can have a really good handle on where your kiddo is at any given moment in time, not just waiting for the report card to come home with maybe some information that you're kind of bummed to see. So, be proactive and really do advocate. And with that, we'll hand it back to Melissa from PTA. Shauna.
Well, hi. This is Shauna again. Thank you so much, Judy and Melissa, for that very valuable information. It's great to have teachers like you, so as a resource. And in addition to the great information from the presentation, there are several documents that are uploaded into the webinar handout section. You'll want to take a look at those and probably download those. There's the links to learn from that include links to the videos, articles, and a website that were mentioned during the presentation. Also, PTA's Moving Beyond the Bubble, which is a very valuable resource as a parent. A few weeks ago, PTA's partner Learning Heroes released a new resource entitled Spring Forward, Ready for the Test, Ready for Life. It's a research-based bilingual resource to help parents get their child confident and ready for the state test. All of those documents are in that webinar handout section. And you can also check out the additional information that Learning Heroes has online at balearninghero.org. Their website and resources help parents see the annual state test as another measure of how their child is progressing with grade level skills, and see that it covers the real world skills they care about, like problem solving and critical thinking. The website includes a direct link to the state practice tests, the Ready for the Test one-pager with useful tips, and additional resources such as a family guide on how to use the state test score report. Let's check and see if we have any questions. Anybody's typed into the webinar. We'll give that just a couple minutes in case there's anything. But I want to say thank you again to our presenters and to everyone participating on the webinar. We appreciate you calling in. We will have a recording available for those who are not able to attend, and you all will be able to share that online. And seeing as that we have no questions, we'll go ahead and end the webinar. Thanks so much, Arkansas. We loved having you, and thanks so much, Shelley, Arkansas PTA President, for joining us tonight as well.